Welcome back to Crossbeats production. This is your host, Late 28, down in Aussie with the kangaroos and the knives. Thought I'd just show you a quick little tutorial. Cheers. On here with Nate 28, and this is Crossbeats Productions. So this is a tutorial on how to mix your track using stock plugins, and that's exactly what I've done on this track. And I just wanted to show myself and also show you guys that it can be done, and not using any third-party VSTs whatsoever. Basically, what I have done though, to be honest with you, with this track, it came out of Maschine, and there were plugins that I did use when I was creating the track, and they were part of the mixing process of making the track. But what I have done then is dropped in certain plugins into this, which is the stock basic plugins that you'd see in Studio One to finalize the mix of the track once it's in the waveform, as you can see here. So I want to show you guys that, you know, the compressor, the EQ, the mix tool, you know, using using gain and things like that, or even the analog delay within Studio One. All of these plugins are really good, and they actually can be used as a basic stock plugin if you don't have third-party VSTs. To be honest, with third-party VSTs, obviously you do get certain features on the VSTs that you might not get in these plugins. But if you're not able to purchase those plugins, and if you're running low on cash and you don't have that kind of money to go buy every VST that comes out every day, there seems to be a new one every day almost. But anyway, if you don't have the money to buy VSTs, then, you know, definitely stick to what you've got in Studio One, because I found that the compressors, even this compressor in Studio One, that's the main bus compressor I'm using, and even the multi-band compressor if you're looking at using multi-band compressors. Now, multi-band compressors are a bit harder to use if you're not used to using compressors, period. But if you kind of know how a compressor works, then definitely try this multi-band compressor out. It's definitely something it's worthwhile trying out. Also, the fat channel, I'm using the compressor, and the fat channel is as just a small amount of compression on the track as well. And that has its own kind of sound to it. And I'm using the spectrometer, which is really fantastic. I think it's really great for a spectrometer, especially in a standard spectrometer out of Studio One. I'll show you how that works in a second as well. And I've expanded it so it's a lot larger in size. And I'm using the stock limiter as well, which is the mastering limiter that I'm using on this track. So as you can see, there's a couple of different EQ moves happening here. And I'll just see if I can move these down so you can see what's going on with the EQ and stuff like that. Actually, you don't need to move that down. I'll just leave that and put that there, and I'll leave that alone. Don't need that there. Fat channel, why not? So, alright, with the delays and stuff like that, obviously the settings are, as you can see here. Now, the fantastic thing about Studio One, I guess, if you use the I think it's the 192, Studio One 192, I'm pretty sure that has the ability to do a preamp EQ and preamp compression and things like that. So if you're using a mic line in and you're looking at recording vocals, you can actually record the vocals and put compression on those vocals as they come into your DAW. Now, I use an Apollo Twin UAD interface, which works in that similar kind of fashion. So if you have a UAD, you probably know how this works, but it basically has a function here where you can drop in unison plugins, you can drop in your compressor, etc., EQ, all those kind of things before they actually hit your DAW, and do compression and EQ those ways prior to entering your DAW. But anyway, nonetheless, if you're looking at doing that, that's one way of doing it. If you have the Studio 192, that integrates really well with this DAW. So I mean, if you're looking at a interface, that's probably one to look at if you're interested in that kind of thing. Nonetheless, let me just explain how I've done work on this track and how I've done my EQ moves, the compression, etc. And I'll just start by playing the track and giving you guys a demo of how that sounds, and you can take what you want from this and work through individual mixes and things like that. So let's go through the track and we'll just start playing that and see what it sounds like. Okay, so I just wanted to give you guys a demo of the track and show you what it sounds like, and obviously start working around how I did certain things with the mix. Now, basically, like I said to you before, I pre-made this track within Maschine, and I've then bounced out the audio files, so you can see them here, and they're all color coded, so that makes sense to me in the way I'm mixing the track. Now, I guess if you're looking at this in a way of having them completely color coded, you could do your drums, say, in a gold color or green or whatever you want to do, just to keep them all the same. In my idea, I guess I like to have them just kind of color coded so it makes sense to me, and basically line them all up in the mixer. So anyway, just so you guys can understand, the reason why you color code stuff, and as you probably are aware already, is to keep track of your tracks. You know, you start to lose stuff when you're mixing things, and you don't know what's coming from where and all that sort of stuff. So it does help you a lot to keep track of it. Alright, so since we're past that part of it, let's go through the EQ and the compression moves that I did at the start. First off, what I did was I didn't have this limiter on here, which you can see here. I didn't have that on the mix bus, and I had a spectrometer on there to kind of just see what was going on with the mix. Let me just show you what a spectrometer does in case you don't know what they are or what it is. Basically, it just shows you the entire spectrum within the mix itself. So it'll show you from 20k to 20 hertz, and it basically gives you an explanation of where the mix is and where frequencies are sitting within the mix. So I'll just quickly play a section of the track so you can hear or see what's going on actually. Okay, so as you can see, there's 1 meter here which is showing me in a waterfall style meter where it's basically heat map, and it shows you where the hottest parts are on the track and things like that. And then you see there's another part of the track where it's in a spectral meter. So that's two sections of viewing, I guess, you can look at. You can change this to however you want it to really look. If you want it to have an octaves, you can do that. If you wanted to have it in just a FET view where it shows one section of the whole entire thing in FET view, FFT I mean, sorry. You can change it to FFT curve. Play around with it yourself, just see what you can do. It gives you an idea of different things within the frequency spectrum. I like to have it in a mixture of both, so I can see what's going on with all of the track. Especially when you're looking at the low end of the track as well. You want to have complete control over the low end so that you don't have too much low end frequency kind of going on with your mix. When it comes to using a limiter on the track, that's where it's going to affect you the most. So if you notice that the low end of your track, it basically starts to impede your limiter, and you'll hear your limiter to start to distort if there's a lot of low end frequencies, or even so much so if you had a lot of high end frequencies, it might even do the same kind of thing. But I find that with limiters, the low end frequencies are kind of the things that are affected the most throughout the mix anyway. So what I did was I didn't have the fat channel on here at the start, didn't have the multiband compressor. I left the spectrometer on there just so I could see what was going on with the mix. And as I said, with the compressor, I kind of set this up from the start. You don't have to do this. This isn't a rule of thumb, and it's not the first time it's been talked about either. So to explain how I set it up was basically I looked at the BPM of this original track, and I saw it was 192. I loaded up this page here, which it shows, there's several pages on the internet, but if you want to look at it, this is the actual link for this one. I might include it in the actual description of the tutorial so you can see it. But what I did was I put in the BPM here, I pressed calculate time delay or delay time, and it gave me 78 milliseconds, and that's on a 16th note. So I know then for a fact that if I've got a compressor, then I can set my delay, so my release and my attack times in accordance with those times. So say for example I have a release of 78 milliseconds, which is quite a fastish kind of release, and a halftime of 38.5, which is a moderately slow attack. It's not too fast and it's not too slow, but it's definitely up there with the attack times. So what I did was I put it on the adaptive. I didn't want to put auto because auto then takes control of the attack and release times, and you wouldn't be able to see this. So what I did was I put it on the adaptive, so it does adapt to the release and the attack times, but it kind of goes along with the tempo of the track, and that's kind of what you're looking for. The next thing I did was I set the threshold to around about, I think it was 15 minus 15 or minus 13 decibels, somewhere like that. I wasn't really getting much compression at all when I first set this compressor up, when I started mixing into the compressor. The thing is, you know, when you're looking at mixing your track, you can do it in two different ways, or you can do it in multiple different ways, to be honest. But you can do obviously mixing into a compressor and then later on adjust the settings of the compressor and try and work around that. Or you can not have a compressor at all and try and mix and get your static mix set up and control the dynamics to a degree, and then start to put or apply compression to that. Either way works fine. It's just really based on taste of what you want the track to sound like, really, at the end of the day. So what I did was I set up a 4:1 ratio. So I've got 4 dB of compression and 1 dB of gain coming out, and then I've got an auto gain function set here. So it's actually making up the gain that I've lost in the compression, but it's doing it in an automatic fashion. So you can see that that's the setting there. Now with the knee of the compressor, now that's just based on taste. So whatever sounds right to you, adjust the knee to suit the attack of the compressor and things like that. So with the type of compression that you're listening for, I guess you're listening for the kick and the bass and how that is affecting those two parts of the instruments there. And that's kind of what I did with my compressor here. And I set up a look ahead function so it knows the transients that are coming prior to the compression. That's basically all that is. I've got flies flying on me. That's why I was wearing this crazy hat at the start, hoping that it would get the flies out of here. But anyway, I just thought it'd be a funny thing to show you on the video, by the way. So it's stereo linked, so the stereo and the mono are linked together. There's no separation between the left and the right channels. It's stereo linked. So if you don't know what that function is, that's what that is. It just allows you to do that. I've got no sidechain at all happening with this. You know, you can set up a sidechain and listen to the filter if you want. You can set it up to a certain level of hertz or kilohertz if that suits your track, but I didn't do that on this track because I just wanted the entire spectrum of the mix compressed. Whether or not it was the low end pushing that track or it was the top end, I just wanted to have that part of the compression not interfered by a low end or a high pass filter or a high cut. So that's the compression set up there. Now what I did, like I said to you, is I mixed in the entire track into that compressor and I started working on it as I had that set up already. And then later on I introduced the fat channel, the multi-band compressor, and so on and so forth. Let me just take off the plugins off the mix bus, and I'll just play the track to you without it, a section of it anyway, and then you can hear what it sounds like, and then I'll just put the compressor on there and you can hear the difference between the two. Okay, so let me put the compressor on there as well, and you can hear the difference between the compressor and not compressed and not compressed signal. Alright, so as you could hear with the track there, it basically just glues stuff together and it brings all the I guess the kick and the snare and all that together with the piano, and it allows the track to just be cohesive in that sense. That's all that compression really is. It tries to bring up the quieter parts and tame the I guess if you're looking at transients, it tries to tame the transients of the mix and bring the transients closer to the lower frequency levels. So obviously the louder parts become quieter. Well, not so much quieter, but they come closer. The two levels come closer together, and it sounds more cohesive like that. So that's why I introduced the compressor and I started mixing into that. But obviously I started to tweak the compressor as I got into the final mix and the mastering stages of the track and got it to that level there. Now, the first things that I did when I was looking at the track was the low end of the track. Basically, I looked at what was happening there. So I want to explain to you something briefly that I've also noticed on this track, and I want to show you that how it looks in a visual sense as well. So if you just look at these two instruments here, that's two different kicks. One is the really light kick. Okay, so that's the really light kick, and the other one is the really low end kick. Okay, so Those together though, I basically stacked kicks, but what I've noticed here in this track is some parts of the kick are actually creating phase issues. So if you look at this part here, it's not in line with this part here of the track of the actual kick. So you can see one part of the kick here, it's actually facing down, and the other part of the kick here is actually facing up. Now if you're looking at a track in a cohesive phase, it should be like this. So it should look like a point up and a point up, and then a point down and a point down. So there's an issue here where there's a bit of phase cancellation. In this particular kick though, and with the kick that I've stacked on it, it actually didn't interfere in a negative way. And there is times where phase cancellation can work to your favor, and this is one of those particular times. I wouldn't recommend trying to create phase cancellation in your track just as, you know, just as a sake of having it there, or doing it because I did it on this video. What I would say though is that, you know, in particular times where you notice this phase cancellation, listen to the track and try and analyze how it sounds, so that way you know when it comes to the mixing and the finalization of the track, that you know this issue isn't going to affect the way that your compressor and the EQ and certain things within your mix are working, so that later on, you know, you're not going to have some crazy sounding track. Now the reason why I left it the way it is, and the reason why the phase cancellation isn't affecting this in a negative way, is because the kick is actually cancelling it out in a positive sense, where I have a certain part of the track. If you look here, there's a certain part of the track where that kick is actually not activating at all, and the low end part of the kick is just there on its own. So I'll just play that to you and you can hear it. Alright, so if you're wearing headphones, you'd probably want to recommend wearing a pair of headphones or a really good pair of studio monitors that can get the low end frequencies that I'm showing you right now. But if you're not, just know that there's low end frequencies there. So pretty much what I was trying to get in this particular track when I stacked these two kicks together was that real top end part of the kick, as you can hear. I'll just play it to you. Okay, so that part of the kick there, it has some kind of like a soccer ball kind of sound to it, like as if you were kicking a soccer ball, that first initial transient of the soccer ball. That's the kind of sound that I was looking for, like that kind of really top end stuff that makes the kick stick out on, let's say for example, laptop speakers or a phone or whatever like that, like an iPod or whatever it might be. Sometimes you don't hear the really low end part of the kick in those kind of applications, and that's where I was trying to get that to stick out and show that in those scenarios. If you didn't have an issue with having to listen on an iPad or iPhone or whatever it might be, it wouldn't be an issue. But sometimes people just listen to those devices and they'll miss out on the kick being in the track. So that's why I introduced the stack of the kick, and I noticed then when I did that I got a bit of phase cancellation, but it wasn't in a negative way. So the reason why I say it's not in a negative way, because if you listen to this part of the track, I'll just show you here. This is the low end kick here. I'll just label that actually in a different color so you can see it. So the low end part of the kick, it's a lot quieter in this section of the track, and that's at the start of the track. It's introducing that part of the kick, and I wanted to keep it at a lower level so it wasn't overpowering this part of the kick. So I'll just play that to you briefly. So it's got a bit of a knock to it, but it's not completely overpowered by the low end of the kick. Listen to this section of the kick though, where it gets louder. Play it from the start. Alright, so it basically sounds like I've added like some kind of sub to it or something like that, but really what I've done is pre-dropping this track into Studio One, I hit a compressor on the actual kick. I took out most of the top end of this particular type of kick that I created, and I hit it with compression and leveled the sound out. As you can see, the transients there are pretty much all even. There's no variation within the transient, and that shows you that I've compressed this to a degree that it's almost rolled off part of the transient in that sense. Whereas the transient on this particular kick, as you can see, it's a bit stronger, it's more intense at the first part of the kick, and then it kind of gets quieter from the sustain of the kick. This is a really loud sort of sustain. It sustains reasonably fast, but it's a little bit louder in that sense, and the sustain part, together with the kick, the transient, and then the sustain part of this kick, it kind of really sounds good. So just so you know, that's kind of taken out the transient there. So that's a quick way of working, I guess, getting two kicks together and having them sound cohesive, but also just looking out for the phase as well, because it does interfere with certain parts of your track. So this part of the track on its own, it's just got the low end kick and it just plays on its own, and I'll just play that to you real quick. Alright, so that's obviously there to get the sub, and that's pretty much the only reason why I have that kick, and plus it sounds good anyway. So let me just play a section here with the bass and the kick together so you can hear what they sound like. Alright, so what you want to do is focus your eyes on the spectrometer. We'll just pin that so it's there, and I'll just play a part of the kick and the bass, and then I'll play a part with the kick and the bass aren't all together there. So let me just play. I'll play the bass so you can just see the kick on the real low end bass of the kick. So if you just look there, there's a lot of the red, kind of pinky orange color stuff there. Let me play it with the kick. Top end part of the kick there, the soccer ball. So it hits a bit more up there, and it gives you a bit more frequency spectrum there as well. Let me just play the bass on its own so you can see what's going on there. Alright, so that's pretty cool. You can actually see where the glide happens with the bass and how it goes up and down the frequency spectrum as well. So I guess there's a couple of things that you want to look out for, especially when you have so much low end in a track, and how these kicks and things like that are coming together. So what I was focusing on was where these had their frequencies and where they were trying to, I guess, apply the frequencies most in the track, and where it sounded right and where it sounded cohesive. As you can see with this particular track, I've introduced Red Light District, which is a standard plugin within Studio One, and this plugin is quite good if you want to get a bit of distortion and bring up that low end frequency up further into the higher part of the spectrum of the frequency there. What I did was I took this all the way down to 20 Hertz, so it hit all of the frequencies at 20 Hertz and all the bass down the bottom there. I left this at 9.6K, and I introduced a bit of drive, which is at 4.07, and then I reduced some of the mix of that, so it's pretty much reduced all the way down to about 30%, I think, mix roughly. And there's the fat channel here then, which is removing some of the real low end frequencies. I'm using a filter there, so that's removing at 35 up to 35.37 Hertz, and that's getting rid of that really low end stuff that most of the time is pretty useless when it comes to you know, putting a limiter on your track later on. It definitely starts to steal some of the spectrum and the frequencies that you want to use for the top end stuff, because it's affecting your limiter in that way. It kind of starts hitting your limiter before anything else does, and you can't really limit the track as loud as possible because of that. So as you can see here, that's the only reason why I put this on here, so I could use it as a filter, and then remove some of that real low end frequencies there. So I guess that's the first thing I want to focus your eyes on within this particular track, is the low end frequencies and how to tame those and get them cohesive together. Now, what I did also was I put the kick and the beater of the kick, I guess you could look at it like that. It's more like a soccer ball kind of hit sound. I put those two within a bus, and I bus them, and I call them drum bus, and that here is labeled in white. So as you can see, that's a drum bus. It's just got the kick and the other part of the kick, the two parts of the kick together. And I'll show you as well, there's a couple of things that I've sent to that bus as well to make them cohesive with the rest of the drums. But not everything is sent to there. And there's a good reason why you don't want to do that, because some things you don't want to have them compressed by the compressor all together with the other parts of the kick and the snare and all that sort of stuff together. You don't want to have that going on with every part of the aspect of the song. You want to have stuff that actually has a bit more dynamic range and that breathes within the track. So the things that I haven't put in there, I'll just show you briefly. First off, I think the snare is actually in there. So let me just see if this is the snare. I'll just quickly go up here and go back to that. So yeah, we've got a clap and the drums and the clap. Okay, so the clap, yeah. So I left the clap out of the actual compressor and I left that in a mono. Let me just check as well. Yeah, so the clap's in mono, and the reason why I put that in mono is because I actually had some reverb on the clap within Maschine. And I'll show you how I did that actually in another tutorial as well, because it's actually quite useful to be able to reverb a particular clap to make it sound bigger than it is, but then force it into mono so it doesn't take up that stereo field within your mix. Now it's really handy to be able to do that with other things as well. You could even do that with a kick if you wanted to put a bit of reverb on a kick as well, but sometimes you've got to be careful with that because it might create issues within your track with the reverb. But if you put reverb on your track to make, your kick to make it sound fatter and bigger, that's definitely a way of making it sound like that, making it sound like it's in a room, and then force it into mono, and that way you won't have any issues with your phase later on with that particular track, unless obviously you're doing what I did, whereas putting two kicks together and it created phase issues. At the end of the day, it's a simple track to show you, but I want to show you basically the concept of behind mixing and give you an understanding of how to reach a mix to sound somewhat decent on a final track, so you can send that out to whoever you want so they can rap on it or whatever, and then you can send it back to get it actually fully mixed and mastered, and that's the kind of thing that you kind of want to do. But most artists want to have their track sounding reasonably loud and things like that so they can listen to it and they feel like they're actually part of the track, and when they're rapping on it, it's sounding how they expect it to sound. But when you send a track that hasn't had the full compression or the limiting on it, sometimes people will be like, oh, why does it not sound the same and all that sort of stuff, and they're like, they don't understand that you will finally master it and bring it to the right level and things like that. But if you're getting your tracks out there on Beatport or SoundCloud or wherever you're putting your music, YouTube, whatever it might be, you want to have it sounding reasonably loud, not overly loud where it's distorting, because when you think about it, it'll come down to what YouTube's final compression and things like that are being applied to it, and it might alter your sound anyway. But I wanted to show you that it's possible to mix a track using completely stock plugins and to work around the stock plugins to use them to utilize your mixing and utilize your creative process, and just understand that it's definitely possible to use these stock plugins. They're not bad at all. It's definitely something you want to try out if you have the time to do that. So otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it wasn't a bunch of blibber blabber, but it's definitely something I want to try and show you that it's possible to mix and go through different processes and understand, or get you guys to understand how they all work. So otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video, and peace.